Most people walk into Walmart this week and have no idea what's about to happen to their bill. I'm not talking about some far-off prediction. I'm talking about right now, this year, on shelves you walk past every single day. I've been tracking prices the way some people track their bank account. Quietly, obsessively. And what I found isn't a rumor. It's sitting right there in government data, industry reports, and company earnings calls, if you know where to look. Nobody is talking about this the way they should be. Not on the news, not in your group chat. Just a few analysts, a few farmers, and now, you. Here's the thing. This isn't a panic video. I'm not telling you the world is ending. I'm telling you that if you shop smart over the next few weeks, you can lock in today's prices on things you're going to buy anyway. That's it. That's the whole game. Stick with me through this list, because number 6 is the one that genuinely caught me off guard. I didn't expect it. When I checked the numbers, I actually said, "No way," out loud in my kitchen. You'll want to hear the full story before you write it off. Before we get into it, if this is the kind of thing you want more of, hit subscribe. I go through this every single week so you don't have to dig through spreadsheets yourself. Let's get into it. Item number 1. Ground beef and beef products. This one isn't a surprise to anyone who's bought a pack of ground beef lately, but the reason behind it is worse than most people realize. The US cattle herd is at its smallest size in roughly 75 years. Ranchers spent years shrinking their herds because of drought and high feed costs, and you can't just rebuild a cattle herd overnight. It takes years. Meanwhile, demand for beef has stayed strong, so you've got a shrinking supply running straight into steady demand. Industry analysts have said flatly that prices have nowhere to go but up. Wholesale beef prices are already sitting at record highs for this time of year, and forecasters expect farm-level cattle prices to keep climbing through the rest of 2026. I started buying in bulk about 8 months ago, almost by accident. I grabbed a bigger pack because it was on a rollback, froze half of it, and didn't think much of it. Then I compared what I paid to what my sister paid for the same cut 3 months later. It wasn't a small gap. It was enough to make me start paying attention to this stuff for real. If you eat beef regularly, this is the moment to buy in larger quantities when you see a sale, portion it out, and freeze it flat in bags so it thaws fast. Ground beef freezes well for 3 to 4 months without losing much quality. Watch for manager markdowns near the sell-by date too, since those are often the best per pound price you'll find. This is the kind of thing that quietly eats your grocery budget without you noticing until you add it up. Getting ahead of it now protects money you're going to spend either way. Item number 2. Coffee. If your coffee habit already feels more expensive than it used to, you're not imagining it. Coffee prices have been running with double-digit increases year over year, and the reasons stack on top of each other in a way that's hard to unwind. The US grows almost none of its own coffee, so we're dependent on imports from regions that have been dealing with rough weather and lower yields. On top of that, tariff policy has added another layer of cost that keeps getting passed down to the shelf price, on top of the raw bean market already sitting at historic highs. Analysts who track this closely have said most of the recent retail increases aren't even a direct response to tariffs. They're catching up to a raw coffee market that's already been elevated for over a year. I switched from my usual bag brand to a store brand about 6 months ago, just to see if I'd notice a difference. And honestly, I didn't notice much difference in taste. What I did notice was the price gap kept getting wider every time I restocked. That's when I started buying the bigger bags instead of the small ones, since the per ounce price drops noticeably at the larger sizes. If coffee is non-negotiable in your house, buy the larger bags when they're discounted, and keep it sealed in the freezer if you're stocking more than a month's supply. Whole beans hold up better over time than pre-ground. Nobody wants to be the person who's out of coffee and stuck paying full price with no other option. A little planning here goes a long way. Item number 3. Sugar. This one flies under the radar because sugar feels like a background ingredient, not something people think about buying ahead. But it's quietly become one of the fastest rising grocery categories out there. A big chunk of the sugar in this country is imported, And a lot of that supply comes from countries that have been redirecting their sugarcane harvest toward ethanol production instead of food. Less sugarcane going to the food supply means less sugar on the market, and less supply pushes prices up. Tariffs and higher transportation costs are adding to that pressure too. USDA forecasts have this category rising faster than the overall grocery average this year, and it's expected to keep outpacing typical yearly increases. I only notice this because I bake more than the average person, and I buy sugar in 5-pound bags fairly often. When I went to grab my usual bag last month, the price had jumped enough that I actually checked twice to make sure I was looking at the right shelf tag. Sugar has a long shelf life if you keep it dry and sealed, so this is one of the easier things to stock up on without worrying about spoilage. Grab a couple extra bags next time you see a decent price and store them somewhere dry. It's a small thing individually, but it adds up across everything that uses it, from your coffee to your baking to the sodas in your fridge. Item number 4. Canned goods and packaged foods. Here's one that has nothing to do with what's inside the can and everything to do with the can itself. Steel prices for packaging have jumped significantly over the past year, and manufacturers are paying noticeably more for the cans, jars, and packaging materials that hold your food. That cost doesn't just disappear. It gets built into the shelf price of everything from canned vegetables to canned soup to canned beans. Supply chain experts have pointed directly at rising packaging material costs as a driver here, separate from whatever's happening with the actual food inside. I stumbled onto this one honestly by accident. I was buying canned tomatoes for a big batch of sauce, and the case price felt off compared to what I remembered. When I looked into why, it wasn't the tomatoes. It was the packaging costs pushing the whole category up. Canned goods have an incredibly long shelf life, which makes this one of the easiest categories to stock up on without any real downside. Watch for case discounts and buy in bulk when you see them, especially for staples like beans, tomatoes, and soup. This is a quiet one. Nobody talks about packaging costs at the dinner table, but it's sitting right there on your receipt. Item number 5. Orange juice and citrus products. If you've bought orange juice recently and felt a small jolt at the register, that's not your imagination either. Citrus-growing regions have been dealing with ongoing crop disease issues and weather disruptions that have shrunk supply for years now. Fresh fruit prices overall are expected to stay relatively steady this year, but juice and processed citrus products draw from a smaller, more strained part of that supply chain, which keeps upward pressure on the price. Industry reports have flagged citrus as one of the more fragile categories to watch, given how slow it is for groves to recover once they're hit. I used to buy orange juice without thinking twice about it. Now, I actually compare it to juice blends and other breakfast drink options before I default to the same carton every week. It's not that I stopped liking it, it's that the price gap became hard to ignore. If your family goes through a lot of orange juice, concentrate versions tend to hold their price better than fresh squeezed cartons, and they store longer in the freezer. Buying a few extra containers when there's a sale is a reasonable hedge here. Small habits like this one are exactly what adds up over a year without anyone noticing until the total hits. Item number 6, chocolate and candy. Okay, this is the one I told you about. Number 6. And it's bigger than I expected when I actually looked into it. Cocoa prices have more than doubled since 2024. Not gone up 10%, doubled. There's a record supply deficit in cocoa-growing regions, and industry reports suggest that deficit is likely to persist at least through the next crop cycle ending in the fall of 2026. Major chocolate manufacturers have already announced price increases in the double digits this year, specifically because of how high cocoa costs have gotten. This isn't a minor seasonal bump. This is one of the sharpest commodity swings in the entire grocery aisle right now. And it's happening quietly while everyone's attention is on beef and eggs. I have a bit of a chocolate habit, I'll admit it. I buy the same bars almost every week. When I checked the price history on my usual brand a few months back, I genuinely didn't believe what I was looking at first. I went and checked the receipt from a year ago just to confirm it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't. If chocolate is a staple in your house, holiday sales and bulk multi-packs are your best friend right now. Chocolate stores well in a cool, dry place for months, so stocking up during a discount period is worth doing before the next round of price increases lands on shelves. This is exactly the kind of thing that sneaks up on people. You don't notice a doubling happen in one trip. You notice it a year later when you finally compare notes. Item number 7. Olive oil and specialty. Cooking oils. Cooking oil is one of those categories that quietly touches almost everything you cook, and specialty oils like olive oil have been under real pressure. Olive oil is heavily import dependent, and weather issues in major growing regions combined with higher transportation and tariff-related costs have kept prices elevated well above where they sat just a couple of years ago. It's part of a broader pattern where imported specialty goods are more exposed to price swings than domestically produced staples. I started diluting my olive oil use with a cheaper neutral oil for everyday cooking and saving the good stuff for dishes where it actually matters, like dressings. It wasn't some dramatic lifestyle change. It was just a practical adjustment once I noticed how much that bottle had crept up. If you go through olive oil regularly, buying the larger tin instead of the small bottle usually gets you a better per ounce price, and it stores fine in a cool cabinet for a long time. Keep it away from direct light and heat, and it'll hold up well past the date on the label. This is one of those categories where a small adjustment in how you buy makes a real difference without changing how you actually cook. Item number 8. Butter and dairy. Staples dairy has been more stable than beef or eggs, but it's not immune, and butter in particular is worth watching. Rising grain costs used to feed dairy cattle put upward pressure on milk production costs, and that pressure eventually works its way into butter, cheese, and other dairy staples. It's been a slower, steadier climb compared to some of the more dramatic swings elsewhere in the store, but it's persistent. I keep butter in my freezer pretty much constantly at this point. It freezes cleanly for months without changing texture once it's thawed, which makes it one of the easiest staples to stock up on ahead of a price increase. Watch for butter sales around baking seasons, since that's typically when stores discount it most aggressively, and buy a few extra blocks to freeze when you see a good price. Hard cheeses also freeze reasonably well if you're trying to get ahead of dairy costs more broadly. It's not the flashiest item on this list, but butter shows up in more of your cooking than you probably realize, and a steady climb is still a climb. Item number 9. Bacon and pork products. Pork has stayed more moderate compared to beef, but it's still ticking upward, and bacon specifically tends to move with its own seasonal patterns on top of that. Feed costs and labor costs affect pork production the same way they affect beef, just to a smaller degree so far, since pork supply hasn't been squeezed nearly as hard as cattle supply has. Even a modest year-over-year increase adds up if it's a household staple you buy weekly. I noticed this one mostly because bacon is one of those items I buy on autopilot, and I stopped comparing prices on it for a while. When I finally paid attention again, the per-pound cost had crept up more than I expected for something that's supposed to be the stable protein option right now. Bacon freezes well, especially if you portion it before freezing, so you're not thawing more than you need at once. Watch for sales tied to holiday cooking seasons, since that's typically when you'll see the deepest discounts. It's easy to stop watching the prices on things you buy out of habit. This is a good reminder to check back in occasionally, even on the safe items. Item number 10. Frozen shrimp and seafood. Seafood, especially imported frozen shrimp, is another category that's more exposed to tariffs and international shipping costs than most people assume. A large share of the shrimp sold in US grocery stores is imported, which means it's directly affected by tariff policy and shipping cost fluctuations in a way that domestically raised proteins aren't. Fish and seafood overall have been flagged as a category expected to grow faster than its historical average pace this year. I didn't think much about where my shrimp came from until I started reading the fine print on the bag one day, out of boredom. Once I knew it was imported, the price movement made a lot more sense, and I started watching it more closely. If shrimp and other frozen seafood are part of your regular rotation, buying the larger bags when they're discounted and keeping them properly sealed in the freezer is the most straightforward way to get ahead of this one. Frozen seafood holds up well for months if it stays properly sealed and doesn't get freezer burn. This is a category people don't think to stock up on, but it behaves a lot like the pantry items on this list once you understand what's driving the price. Item number 11. Imported spices. Spices are easy to overlook because you use small amounts at a time, but almost all of them are imported, and that makes them quietly sensitive to the same pressures hitting coffee and cocoa. Weather disruptions in growing regions, higher shipping costs, and tariff exposure all stack up in this category the same way they do for other imported specialty goods. Because spices are a small line item individually, most people never notice the increase until they go to replace a jar they've had for years and get a bit of a shock at the new price. I went to restock cinnamon and black pepper on the same shopping trip a while back and noticed both had jumped more than I expected for something I buy so rarely. It made me start thinking about spices as part of the same pattern as everything else on this list, not some separate, untouchable category. Spices have an extremely long shelf life if stored properly in a cool, dark cabinet, so this is a low-risk category to stock up on when you see a good price, especially on the ones you use constantly like garlic powder, cumin, or black pepper. It's a small line item, but small line items across a full pantry add up to real money over a year. Item number 12. Snack foods and chips. Snack foods sit at the intersection of a few different pressures at once, which is why this category has been creeping up steadily. Packaged snacks rely on cooking oils, packaging materials, and often imported ingredients like cocoa or specialty flavorings, all of which have been under their own price pressure this year. When several cost inputs rise at the same time, the final shelf price tends to move faster than any single ingredient would explain on its own. I noticed this mostly through my kids, honestly. Their favorite snack multi-pack used to be a predictable price every time I grabbed it, and over the past year, that predictability disappeared. It wasn't one big jump. It was a series of smaller ones that added up. Multi-packs and family-size bags typically offer a better per-ounce price than individual bags, and most chips and crackers store well for weeks if kept sealed. Watching for stock-up sales on your household's regular snacks is one of the easier wins on this entire list. It's not a dramatic category, but it's one of the ones people buy the most often without comparing prices, which makes it easy to miss. Item number 13. Cheese moves along with the broader dairy category, but it deserves its own mention because of how differently people stock up on it compared to milk or butter. The same rising grain and production costs affecting butter apply here, and hard cheeses in particular have been edging upward steadily rather than spiking suddenly. Because cheese is such a staple across so many meals, even a modest increase shows up across a lot of your weekly cooking. I started buying block cheese instead of pre-shredded a while back, partly for the price difference and partly because pre-shredded cheese has a noticeably shorter shelf life once opened. That switch alone made a real dent in how often I was replacing it. Hard cheeses freeze reasonably well if you're planning to stock up ahead of a price increase, and block cheese generally lasts longer in the fridge than shredded versions. Buying in block form and shredding it yourself is a simple way to stretch your budget further on this one. It's one of those staples that touches breakfast, lunch, and dinner, so even small savings here compound over a month. Item number 14. Bottled soda and canned beverages. This one combines two of the pressures we've already talked about, sugar and packaging, into a single category, which is part of why it's worth watching closely. Rising sugar costs and higher packaging material prices for cans and bottles both feed directly into the price of soda and other packaged beverages. When two of your biggest cost inputs rise at the same time, the final product tends to move more than people expect from a single ingredient shift. I don't drink much soda myself, but I noticed this one through a family member who buys it by the case regularly. The case price had gone up enough between visits that it actually came up in conversation, which is usually a good sign something's shifted more than usual. If soda or canned beverages are a regular purchase in your house, buying by the case during sales events rather than grabbing individual bottles is the most reliable way to get ahead of this one. These products have a long shelf life, so there's little downside to stocking up when the price is right. It's easy to treat this as an occasional treat purchase, but for a lot of households, it's a weekly line item that adds up fast. Item number 15. Weekly shopping habits and timing. The last item on this list isn't a product. It's a habit, and it might matter more than anything else here. A lot of shoppers, especially households working paycheck to paycheck, have shifted towards smaller, more frequent shopping trips rather than one big stock-up trip. Retail data has actually pointed to this shift directly, with lower and middle-income households making more frequent, smaller purchases tied to their pay schedule instead of buying ahead. That habit feels safer in the moment, but it usually means paying full price more often instead of catching sales and stocking up when prices dip. I used to shop this way myself, a little bit every few days, grabbing whatever I needed right then. Once I started planning 2 weeks at a time instead and building my list around what was actually on sale, my total spending dropped in a way that surprised me without changing what I was actually eating. If you can shift toward planning around sales cycles and buying shelf-stable and freezer-friendly items in larger quantities when they're discounted, you end up naturally protected against a lot of what's on this list, even the categories we didn't get to today. This is the habit that ties every other item together, and it's the one most people overlook completely. So here's the pattern underneath everything on this list. It's not one company, one product, or one bad year. It's cattle herds that take years to rebuild, cocoa and coffee supplies that are structurally tight, packaging materials that cost more to produce, and import-dependent goods that are exposed to tariffs and shipping costs in ways domestic staples aren't. None of this means you need to panic or clear out a shelf. It means the next few weeks are a good window to buy a little more of what you already use, store it properly, and stop paying full price out of habit. That's the whole strategy. Buy smart, not scared. Most people are going to notice all of this the same way they always do, 3 months from now, standing at the register wondering why their total went up again. You don't have to be one of them. If this kind of breakdown is useful to you, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I've got another list coming soon that's going to surprise a few of you even more than today's did. Drop a comment and let me know which item on this list hit closest to home for you. Thanks for sticking with me through this one. I'll see you in the next video.